51. Peace, peace, peace. Peace, love, and light to all American Aborigines. This is your brother Aboriginal Power. Hopefully you tuned in to the show, man. This is a Wake and Bake show. Make sure y'all support the channel. We do have Dr. Longo, aka Old World Florida, in here today. We're gonna start this thing off right with the intro music.
Whatever it takes. The alleyway. Feelings from the past, yeah, you gotta pay attention. Feelings from the past, yeah, you gotta pay attention. They won't say my name, but they put it in a mention. Too much sneak dissing, yeah, we need an intervention. Right before the fall, I swear my niggas, they won't listen. Right before the fall, you took them pills, you got addicted. Right before the fall, you run your mouth, you turn to dentist. Free my niggas in the cage, know that shit get lonely. You was with me from the start, but you did me phony. Look my bitch right in the eyes, tell her she my only. Poppin' shit on Instagram, they don't even know me. Had to turn my savage up to turn me to the old me. Killers moving silent, so I gotta kill them softly. Lie better, little baby, but lie better. You playing the other side on God out. Trendsetter, no talking, I did better. They watching my moves, playing my moves. I did let up, I kept it 1,000. Niggas get shifty, I did something, I'm moving around. Gotta get to it, this bread, something they want me to drown. Remember they told me I was nothing, I've been through some things. On God, baby, I can't front it. Feelings from the past, yeah, you gotta pay attention. They won't say my name, but they put it in a mention. Too much sneak dissing, yeah, we need an intervention. Right before the fall, I swear my niggas, they won't listen. Right before the fall, you took them pills, you got addicted. Right before the fall, you run your mouth, you turn to dentist. Free my niggas in the cage, know that shit get lonely. You was with me from the start, but you did me phony. Look my bitch right in the eyes, tell her she my only. Poppin' shit on Instagram, they don't even know me. Had to turn my savage up to turn me to the old me. Killers moving silent, so I gotta kill them softly. Do better, you said that you do better. These niggas playing at 50, I really got moved better. I got these on my block, I can't play round. I position on my life, I can't play round. We gon' get it back in blood if they stay round. Know them niggas off the drugs, they gon' lay down. I was love, you put me right in the middle. That niggas that screaming gang and niggas that wanna kill you. They got feelings from the past, pay attention. They only sending shots cause these niggas want attention. Won't be no RIP, heli in the mention. Putting threats on my name, made me turn them to a pension. Feelings from the past, yeah, you gotta pay attention. They won't say my name, but they put it in a mention. Too much sneak dissing, yeah, we need an intervention. Right before the fall, I swear my niggas, they won't listen. Right before the fall, you took them pills, you got addicted. Right before the fall, you run your mouth, you turn to dentist. Free my niggas in the cage, know that shit get lonely. You was with me from the start, but you did me phony. Look my bitch right in the eyes, tell her she my only. Poppin' shit on Instagram, they don't even know me. Had to turn my savage up to turn me to the old me. Killers moving silent, so I gotta kill them softly.
Shout out to everybody in the building. We're gonna continue with the intro music for those that's in here. Make sure y'all turn up, support the channel, hit the like button, man. I want this show to be one of the latest ones on the YouTube right now. So in order to put this channel in the algorithm, we need each and every one of you guys to hit that like button and share the live stream, man. Let's get it.
Whatever it takes. Exactly.
Right, this shit crazy.
Feel nothing at all. Put my pain and don't feel nothing at all. Yeah. Yeah, for my pain and don't feel nothing at all. For these niggas, nah, ain't nothing but God. I had to move around with nothing but frauds. I tried to bring the team together, get my vision involved. I gave a plan, but niggas scrambled. It's time to pick up that call. We can't get 1,500 in a 6-week span. Time to pay up, everybody go, I be damn. I should've seen it. All I got is Rain, Slim, Tim, you know it's Teach. I got Tay and I got Leaf. I got Deja and Salih. I got Foreign, they got Feet. They say your name, that's cause you preach. Them niggas folded under heat. No umbrella, let them shots rain down. You believe the dream to stand up, if not lay down. Let it rain down. If you my nigga, then just say it. If you ain't got it, then just say it. Let it rain down. Yeah,
My nigga, then just say it.
let it rain down.
Let it rain down. Right, this shit crazy.
Yeah. We gotta weather the storm. If you don't understand, get better informed. I'm from the trench, and my trust really weathered and torn. With my niggas from the sandbox, trying to put this shit on top some water, but we land locked. We all want the same shit, but can't get on the same page. How bad do y'all really want it? Niggas just be saying things, some places with y'all lives now. Everything that I pipe down. Yeah, I was chilling for a minute, but I'm live now. Niggas talking about the past, come get with me right now. Come and really see my grind. Come and see me live now. I'm live now. I'm live now. Come and see me live now. Ain't no umbrella, let them shots rain down. You believe the dream, then stand up, if not lay down. Let it rain down. My nigga, then just say, you ain't got it, then just say, let it rain down. Yeah, ain't no umbrella, let them shots rain down. You believe the dream, then stand up, if not lay down. Let it rain down. If you my nigga, then just say, if you ain't got it, then just say, let it rain down. Let it rain down. Yeah.
You my nigga that just say it. You my brother that just say it.
Let it rain down.
Let it rain down.
Shout out to all the beautiful black-minded brothers. Shout out to everyone to hit the like button, share the like. I want to say peace and blessings to you guys and your family. Shout out to the brothers and sisters that took the time out to get classes in the chat. This is going to be an instant classic. We got the brother Dr. Longo on here with us today, man. Shout out to you, brother. How you feeling this grand rising this evening?
I'm doing well, AP. Thanks for having me.
Man, more than pleasure, more than a pleasure. We want to start this thing off right, man. Anything you want to say to the brothers and sisters before we get started with some of the questions and getting into the bill? Shout out to everybody in the building. You guys hit that like button. Let's get it.
No, just excited to be here, and it was good talking to you when you called in on my end, and here I am, and I'm ready to go.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It was definitely a good build with you the other night. You jumping on, and congratulations to your 25,000 subscribers.
Thanks.
Got plenty more to go with that. Plenty more to go. So first thing I want to ask, what is your name? Is it Dr. Narco Longo, Old World Florida? What do you like to be called? First and foremost.
Dr. Longo. So Narco Longo is my name rearranged. Shouldn't be too hard to figure out for people that want to, but not a doctor, definitely not a medical doctor. Just having fun with it. That's my I guess my YouTube persona. But when people come in the store, I introduce myself, and I don't guard my identity. I just choose not to spread it all over the place.
There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing absolutely wrong with that. So yeah, man, we've been watching a lot of your videos, a lot of your information pertaining to Florida. How did you come into this information of focusing in on Florida? That the story that they have alluded and given to us about the Americas, dominantly about Florida, has totally been a lie, if not a hoax.
Mm-hmm. Well, I grew up with a rough understanding of, not a true understanding, but a mainstream understanding. My father went to Florida State University, so he was a Seminole, right? And he kind of was very enamored with Seminole culture, and so we got a kind of a brief history growing up and an appreciation of that. But then later on, as I kind of developed into more of a hippie myself, and alternative histories, alternative practices, alternative diets, stuff like that. Being in Florida, you quickly begin to realize that Florida was the starting place of the United States officially. So I was kind of amazed that all this old world research was going on, and a lot of it's in the Northeast, a lot of it's in the Midwest with the mud floods and then this and that. But I was really amazed that nobody was starting with Florida, because that's kind of where America started. So I felt a responsibility to start looking into Florida. But as I told you before we hopped on, I was watching a channel by the name of New Earth a couple of years ago. And the New Earth channel on YouTube basically was showing satellite footage of Florida and massive, massive earthworks, canal works, right? Dredging projects that were just miles and miles and miles that are not attributed to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, like most of the waterways around Florida is, like the intracoastal. If you've ever been to the intracoastal, it's this narrow canal, essentially, but still wide enough for ships, for big yachts to go down, that traces the entirety of peninsular Florida. And so, number one, that matches up with Plato's description of Atlantis. That series on the New Earth channel was actually called When the Survivors of Atlantis Wake Up, or something like that. Something about the survivors of Atlantis. And it was showing kind of all this Tartaria theory stuff before there was a Tartaria community, back in like 2015, 2016, 20, you know.
So that's what kind of drove. Is there any way we can get an image of this particular canal that trails this particular area? We'll love to see some visuals. Hey, this is what we here for, y'all. Shout out to everybody in the building.
So the intracoastal waterway is a narrow strip that I'm going to share my screen here. Is that cool?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. So you see that? Yep. Okay. So I should note that it's not just Florida. It actually runs from the top of America, in almost near New England, all the way down the Atlantic coast of America. But when it hits peninsular Florida, right around Jekyll Island, if you know what Jekyll Island is, on the border of Georgia, Florida, Jekyll Island is where some dirty business dealings were being done by some very important men. And from there, the intracoastal it's almost wrong to call it a canal, but it is a canal in essence. It's a highway for ships that was actually there when the Spanish got there. Originally, this river that traces all of Florida was there when the Europeans arrived in the 1500s, and it traces the entire peninsula of Florida. So at that time, it was a freshwater system. It was entirely fresh water. And right on the other side of that narrow strip was the ocean. So it was just this narrow strip that was very, very, seems almost artificial because of how continuous it is and how it's not broken in any places. There was only a handful of inlets before. So the whole thing was freshwater. Well, when the Army Corps of Engineers came in the 1900s, they started dredging and opening up inlets every couple miles. So now this entire river is salt water. It's brackish, but largely salt because of how much they've punctured it. But this is what an average... So whenever you go to the beach in Florida, you're not actually going to the beach. You're going to barrier islands. And these barrier islands are a continuous strip that trace the whole Florida peninsula. So she was pointing stuff out like this. And of course, in Miami, they nickname some additional waterways that jut off of the intracoastal. They call the Venetian canals or Venetian waterway. And they have the Venetian Causeway there as well that you can drive your car over. So
that's crazy. So, just for the viewers' sake, are you saying that possibly this particular strip that they're showing could be man-made and is not a natural canal, if you will?
Right. So in Plato's description of Atlantis, he says that there was a inland canal that traces the entirety of a peninsula. And the rough size estimate that he gives, the length of this inland canal, is on par with what we see in Florida, the intracoastal. So as for man-made, I wasn't here back then, but it would either have to be divinely ordained or created by men in some ways superior to us, maybe not with digital technology, but in height, in stature, in understanding of earth and geology. Because when the Army Corps of Engineer came through here, they were spending a lot of resources and they were pretty much just deepening this area. They weren't creating much. They were just kind of freshening it up so that yachts and such could go through there. But ancient peoples were using this as a canoe highway with large, large canoes. Florida's, for those that don't know, here's a good shot of it before the area was developed. Oh, well, this is North Carolina, but same waterway, believe it or not. And on the west coast of Florida, this is where many of these anchors are getting pulled out of. I'm sure you've seen some of the anchors that I've shown.
Yo, that's dope. That's dope. That brings me into my next question.
Sure.
And we know you're doing your own independent research, and we definitely enjoy it. We're using a lot of the correlations that you bring in. Do your research tell you that Negroes was the first beings or began civilization in the Americas and then all over the world? Is that what your research brings you?
Now, I going through the pictures in the Florida Public Archives, you see copper-skinned people. Now, I think the best term, granted I wasn't there, the best term used to describe the people that were here before Columbus that are not the Asiatic phenotypes that you see in the northern United States and are not the hooked nose Plains Indian types that we see in movies. I would say this third type that you see most well depicted in the Florida Seminoles and the Creek and the natives of the southeast United States, who at one time did extend all the way around Mexico into the Yucatan Peninsula. Of course, the Maya were dark-skinned people with dreadlocks. That's evident from looking at their artwork. But as for Florida and the Seminoles and the pictures I'm seeing, I would say that copper-skinned is the best description. And I would say that North African is what we could compare them to. Like, for example, a European person seeing the Seminoles, I attribute those to North Africans with my eyes. Whereas Sub-Saharan African phenotypes, I think, are more distinct, and I think probably do originate in Africa or Austronesia, the South Pacific area. And that would have been more of your Lemuria and your darker skinned Moors. Because I hear a lot of Seminoles, for example, saying we're not Moors per se, we're Semitic people. And so, granted, I'm not a member of any of these tribes, but some identify more with the runaway tribes of Israel, whereas some identify more with the Moors of Africa, North Africa. So I'm definitely not trying to tell anybody where they're from, or I'm more interested in trying to peel open the envelope of who was here before Columbus, because I think everyone can agree we're given a pretty bullshit story on that.
Right. I believe the story has been fabricated since the beginning, and that leads me to my next question. Dealing with those particular Florida, and we'll come with the demographic of people question again. But do you know exactly what makes the Bermuda Triangle known, what it's famously known for, And why is it so close to Florida?
Yeah, that's a good question. And that's definitely a question I'm not finished exploring. And there's a lot more that needs to be figured out. But I can say that Edgar Casey, if you know, Edgar Casey was a mystic, clairvoyant, um, basically a channeler as well, a seer, and he believed, and he had a large following, and we have many of his books here at the bookstore. He placed Atlantis in the Bahamas. So geographically, the Bahamas are essentially the same as Florida. Legally, or according to the government, they're not the same entity, but geographically, they share the same uh, oceanic shelf, I guess you could say. They're on the same mass of Earth. They're just separated by a little bit of sea. So for him to place Atlantis there was very compelling to many, many, many people. And for them to find the Bimini Road later on in the 60s kind of put a lot of fuel into this fire. So I'm a big believer in that. But of course, if you've seen my channel, that's not all I think about Atlantis, but I think that whatever Atlantis was left its biggest imprint in the Bermuda Triangle area. So off the east coast of Florida
Let
seems
me
to be a a high density activity area, electromagnetic phenomena, this and that,
It is,
haunting.
man. Okay, well, we're looking forward to you putting out more information pertaining to, the Bermuda Triangle, man. We definitely intrigued about that.
So I would also add to that Ed Leeds Scownon, the guy who I'll show the Coral Castle here. The Coral Castle down in Homestead, Florida, was made by a little Latvian man from Latvia who claimed to know the secrets of how the pyramids were built. So let's see some images here. This is the Coral Castle down in Florida. It's made of blocks of limestone that some of them I think are like 20 tons. I think the largest one, I could be off on that, but I mean, they're definitely 20,000
If
pounds.
I'm not mistaken, is that the guy who allegedly created these structures by himself
Yep.
using he didn't ever okay.
So this guy, he kind of traveled the world. He crossed continents in order to find the perfect place to build this castle. And he was searching. So he didn't just jump to Florida right away. He did some testing, he did some searching. He, I think, moved to the Northeast United States at first. I'm a little iffy on that. But for a fact, he settled in Florida and he decided this is where I'm going to make this project. And I'll show some older pictures. And you can see this man, Ed Leeds Scownon. He was only 5 feet tall, Ed Leeds Scownon. So not only would it be hard for someone like Dwayne Johnson to lift these rocks or to maneuver them, use machinery, but someone like this, he was like a little elf. And he apparently ate next to nothing, would be up all night, worked, never let anyone watch him work. So why I'm talking about this is he actually chose South Florida to build his castle. And he built the castle first, what does it say? Yeah, made in 1928, he made his castle. In 1939, he decided to move the castle from near Miami farther south to Homestead, Florida. So in Homestead, Florida is where this castle is now. And block by block, he moved this castle by truck, but he didn't let the truck driver watch him load the truck. He said, "You have to go around the wall and put a blindfold on, and you can't watch me load the truck." And that's how they moved this castle from one city to another in Florida. So he moved to Florida and then was like, it's good here in the city that he was in at first, but it's not perfect. Then he found the perfect spot in Homestead, Florida, well within that tip of the Bermuda Triangle, which kind of spans so some place it at Key West, some place it as high as Jupiter, Florida, but it's definitely the southeast coast of Florida, and that's smack dab where he put his castle, the Coral Castle, and this is
Is it?
limestone.
You think it's
Yeah.
possibility that he came across some type of science that was possibly left from those nations in Florida, possibly Atlantean of
Yes.
anti-gravity moving machines? Is that what we get into?
Now that's a great point. He may have not known how to make the stones, but wanted to make the stones, and coming to Florida may have been where he learned to make the stones. Yeah, that's exactly right, because Egypt, even though it's more sandstone, it is limestone blocks. The limestone is what pyramids are made out of, typically around the world. So you have an abundance of limestone here in Florida. And Henry Flagler, the guy that built most of St. Augustine, Florida, he loved to build out of limestone too. And they were building these giant, giant castles. And most of the star forts in the Caribbean and the Atlantic Ocean are made out of limestone as well. And you're right, the natives of Florida were actually casting primitive, quote unquote, primitive. It's not actually that primitive because they last hundreds and hundreds of years, but they were casting their own limestone. And this was called tabby nicks. And this was very similar to Roman cement, right? So this whole theory that cement and cement making was lost to humanity for a period of time, but it was known to the ancients. Well, here in Florida, the natives were still making cement, concrete out of crushed up shell and lime. And when you go to Florida, there's all these shell mounds. Well, the shell mounds are actually just piles of material that they would use for building. When you go to a building site, what do they
Oh,
do?
did they build mounds and pyramid out of some of these seashells? My bad, I didn't mean to cut you off, brother.
Yes. No, you're all good. I was just going to say, when you go to a building site today, you'll see mounds. You'll see, clumped up earth, clumped up material, rubble, debris. And they were doing the same thing back then, but it wasn't just trash. The historians today call them trash piles in America. It's hilarious. But some of these are just piles of seashells, but some of them are largely solidified blocks of shell that's been mixed with sand and lime. And when that's been rained on a couple times and you scorch it a little, you're left with like a solid mass, a solid limestone pyramid. Why play with blocks when you can just cast a pyramid? How much easier would that be?
And how many could you knock out in a certain period of time by doing it?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, hey, if it was anti-gravitic stuff, then it might have been the snap of a finger. Of course, they want us to think it looked like this, guys in loincloths hauling stones up this pyramid. But look at this pyramid here in Florida. This is what we're told is a mound. This is the Letchworth Love Mound in Florida.
And you said it's actually a pyramid, right?
Oh, yeah, that's a pyramid. Now, I'll show you another one. Okay, so I hope that's not too small. But right here in the corner, that's a pyramid. That's in Florida. But they won't let you call that a pyramid in mainstream academia. Now, what that looks like today is like this. And what's funny is that little hills like this are so protected against digging, research, because of, respect for the natives. And I'm all for respecting burials, but when those same rules are not applied to Egypt, Sumeria, India, all these foreign places, they just dig out bodies like crazy. They don't give a fuck. In America, however, it's like this huge guilt trip. Like, oh, the natives, oh, what's hilarious is that you and I both know the people with the feathers and the drums are not necessarily the people that built these structures, and they don't like to talk about that. The Smithsonian doesn't like to talk about
That's
it.
very controversial. As a matter of fact, the Smithsonian first documented sources that they used to build what we call the Smithsonian was artifacts and bones of
Mhm.
indigenous native people taken out of some of the mounds here. And they
Yeah,
wasn't in your traditional clothing. As a matter of fact, one of them alleged was in a zoot suit. If you're familiar with a zoot suit, they
I'm
said
not. What is that?
it's almost like a Blues Brothers style of clothing.
Oh, okay, right.
Uh,
Wow.
with the top hat, and when you look at some of those southeastern tribes, the Muskogee Creek Nation, some of those nations that occupied Florida, they didn't dress like your traditional uh,
No.
Indian is being conveyed as well. So
Hmm.
that's very compelling.
Yeah.
Uh, with I asked you, we talked about it earlier, so I'm gonna just ask the question anyways. Have you
Hmm.
done any astrology? Are you into astrology, and how do you put a date on some of these structures using astrology? And then I
Right.
asked another question about astrology in a second. So yeah,
That's a great question. I haven't been asked a question like that. And frankly, I'm definitely not an expert. I don't attempt to date too many sites. I think that a great use for astrology and something that I'll show you is how you can find the the constellation that a certain area of land is attributed to and associated with. So, you and I both know that in Egypt, the Great Pyramids are associated with Orion's belt and many other complexes around the world that have three pyramid um, sequences are aligned to Orion's belt. In Florida, however, all the sites are arranged to the sign of Pisces. Now you're a Pisces AP, so I think you'll appreciate this. I'll show you some of those in a little bit. We'll go through the
let's go.
constellations and how the constellations are overlaid on all the sites in Florida, all of them. But right before, I don't want to get off of this because I just showed you some pyramids and mounds in Florida, and I showed you what they try to depict them like in art, right? Artistic depictions show like a pyramid, but they don't want to say it's a real pyramid. They just leave it at mound. Well, here I'm showing you. Can you see my screen in the right corner here? Yeah, that's the essentially.
Yeah, I see.
I can't pronounce that Teotihuacan pyramid in Mexico City. On top is 1900, on bottom's 2022. So you can imagine if there are mounds all over the southeast United States that look exactly like the one on top there, which they're in Ohio, they're all along the Mississippi, they're down into Florida. They're
That's crazy. That just looked like a dirt pile, like you see in
mhm,
any other neighboring town that you see in throughout the whole Americas.
yep,
And you telling me that that's one of the largest pyramids on the planet, right there,
mhm,
covered up as just a regular dirt mound.
yep.
Mm.
It's almost like they were covered up, right? In the truest sense of the word, covered up.
You think it was covered up deliberately, or do you
I
think
mean,
it was?
I have a hard time believing that any civilization would let that was living nearby this pyramid would let that pyramid get that dirty. Because in order for that much earth to be on top of the pyramid, that has to be rain and bird shit for hundreds of years to get all those trees and bushes and stuff growing on top of the dirt. So if people were walking on that every day, none of that could grow. So that shows a long period of either like disuse, not being used for extremely long time, which I don't think is likely. I think that was being used as long as people were living near and around it, and probably sometime after 1500. That's probably what they'll tell you too in the mainstream is how to get so. They'll tell you that's only like 400, 300 years of disuse, not being used. I don't buy that.
Yeah, I don't buy it neither, man. Maybe this is just more information that goes into structures. We have sites all over the world. Gobekli Tepe one that's
Mhm.
recently been studied, and that was totally covered up and buried as well, much like what we just see with Teotihuacan in Mexico.
Mhm.
Uh, so yeah, man, I got another question I want to get to pertaining to
Sure.
astrology as well. Have you ever looked at any outside cultures astrology and related it back to the Americas or Florida, if you will?
Yeah. So there are many different zodiacs. You have like lunar systems. You have animal systems. Eastern zodiacs. It's not my expertise, but the zodiac was absolutely observed by every civilization of the ancient world. And in Florida too, you have many sites that are aligned to the equinox, the solstices, lunar, I forget the word, but lunar tracking. They were able to track, the movements of the moon, the sun, plenty of different stars, all with kind of earthworks in the ground. Canals, even canals that we're told are canals for just sailing on in Florida, canoe highways are actually arranged and pointed to some of these, what do they call them? Equinoctial lines, equinox lines, solstice lines. And you see the same thing around the world. And
Like Serpent Mound, if you will.
Mhm,
Okay.
exactly. hmm I'll show you some of those, the Pisces, uh, the Pisces stuff I was just talking about. I'll bring up some pictures here.
Yeah,
Um,
we love to see that. Shout out to everybody in the building. For those that want to inquire, where can you look up some of this information? Where can you find Dr. Longo channel? Hey, you can go to Old World Florida on YouTube. Moderators, drop that link in the chat to his YouTube channel so they can run over and subscribe immediately. Make sure y'all drop that in the chat. Shout out to all my moderators helping out. We appreciate all the work.
okay, so right here, we're looking at different mound sites, temple sites, earthworks scattered around the Florida peninsula. And you're going to see here that all of these sites are arranged to either the constellation Pisces or constellations in and around Pisces. So this was very deliberate. And the importance of this kind of information is just to demonstrate that the entire peninsula of Florida was on the same page spiritually at one point. And you
Can,
had,
can, can I get a date when the last time constellation of Pisces was around? Just roughly.
so the age of Pisces ran from about zero. And actually many associate Pisces with Jesus Christ himself and the birth of Jesus Christ, and that Christ, Yeshua, Emmanuel, whoever this person was who incarnated in and around the year zero, would have been kind of a prophet or a usher of the new age. And there was actually a couple prophets born around that time. So that's not what I really want to debate. But from 2,000 years ago and some change, so Plato said that we're on a 25,000 years cycle. So that gives about 2,000 years and some change to each sign of the zodiac. So every 2,000 years, and it's a little bit over 2,000 years, we're not precise. We don't precisely know. You shift to a new sign of the zodiac. And under this age, the tendencies of humanity change and culture is kind of shifted in a new direction. And so, for your question, 2,000 years ago, roughly, was when the age of Pisces began. And the age of Pisces just recently ended. In some say it hasn't officially ended, but most people kind of agree on a 2012 date where it's the new millennia, YK2, whatever you want to call it. It's the new millennia and it's the new age. And as I was telling you, in 2012, just about, social media became the new norm. Religion went right out the window. Everyone has a cell phone. Every child has a cell phone. LGBTQ became like the new normal. But that is the age of Aquarius that we've just entered. So before the age of Pisces was the age of Aries. And in the age of Aries, you had all these warrior empires like the Persians, the Greeks, the Egyptians, and that was a large warrior culture. But yeah.
Oh no, we appreciate the answer. So I've listened to a couple of your other bills. You brought up maybe I'm paraphrasing the negative and positive energy that differs between Florida and California. I would love for you to elaborate on that.
Okay. So sure, yeah, I'll pull up a good slide about that. But before we get away from this, I just want people to see all of these different mound sites. It might be difficult for people that haven't seen. This is like an aerial shot of different sites being plotted perfectly with different stars and constellations, and it's always the constellation zodiac. And here, these lines right here actually show what I was talking about earlier about the celestial equator, meridian, ecliptic meridian. These people were very, very in tune with the movements of the planets, the stars, the heavens. But yes, I'll bring up that. I'll bring up. I just have to look for it for a sec. But yeah, California, Florida. We can get into the etymology of that. In the word Florida, most places owe their names to gods and goddesses or planets or that's what most ancient places are typically named after, right? Athens, right? So when you have a place, the first thing I like to do is to dissect the linguistics of any name I'm presented with. So in Florida, we're told it was named for flowers, and it means like flowery, right? Or festival of flowers. It was an Easter festival, and they saw so many flowers, and it was Easter Sunday when they arrived to Florida. So they called it Florida. And that's okay. That's believable. There's a lot of flowers in Florida. It's beautiful. But when we look for goddesses that fit the bill, in the name Florida, we find Flora and Ida. And I'm going to get back to these goddesses. I want to show you this slide first. In the name California, we find Kali. We also find Caliph, of course, but Kali and Fornia, like fornication, to fornicate. So here, give me a sec to pull this up. I didn't have it ready.
No, it's all right. That's a dope correlation, though, the way you just broke that down, man. Hey, man, shout out to everybody in the chat, man. Make sure y'all hitting that like button, subscribing to the channel, man. We appreciate everybody for tapping in. It's been a good interview so far, man. We got 267 in here. Make sure y'all share this on all your social media outlets. drop a fire emoji in the chat if you can hear us loud and clear. I want to make sure the audio is good on you guys' end. So let's get it.
Alrighty. So here we have, you can see this okay?
Yeah, I see it clear. Yeah, I see it
Okay.
very clear.
Perfect. So I made this for my Hollywood video, which was about a special group of trees in Hollywood, Florida. And most people don't know there's a Hollywood, Florida. So I made this slide for that presentation, that video. But people really resonated with it. I posted it on Twitter and Instagram. And like I was saying, you have flora. So flora translates to flower, of course, but you also have flora as in fluorescent, which means light, right? Fluorescence. So you have light, and then Ida, which of course etymologically is near to Eden. Ida is also a Greek goddess, and I'll show you her in a second. But in Florida, which is the eastern extremity of the United States, and California, which is kind of the southwestern extremity of the United States. They're both pillar shaped largely. They're both sunny kind of paradises that people really romance and depict in a very tropical, and it's like a infinite vacation. It's a land of leisure, and California and Florida kind of both have that in common. But to dissect the names a little more, Flora is the goddess of flowers, spring, and fertility. Kali is the goddess of death, darkness, and evil. So I put evil in quotes because Kali has many lessons to teach. Kali is not evil inherently, but Kali does rule evil. Just like Satan is not, Satan is also part of God's creation. So Satan is performing a function, so to speak, much as Kali is performing a function. And that function involves a lot of death imagery, disgusting, darkness, like I said. And she's a destroyer. She's a destroyer god as well. And she's very much associated with the left hand path. And I thought that was very interesting. She's kind of emblematic of the left hand path. And the left hand path, there's occultists of different. Sorry, we got a motorcycle going by here. There's occultists of different varieties, right? People have heard of white magic and people have heard of black magic. So, and of course, there's no racial implication there. Some people like to see it that way, but it's simply not. And Kali also happens to be a black goddess. So black goddesses, I don't need to tell you, are not inherently evil. Blackness is associated with femininity and fertility, like fertile earth, like rich, fertile earth. The most fertile earth is black soil, right? So you have many different black goddesses. Kali just happens to be an evil one. And I actually found out that when I searched Flora, I found this picture. Someone actually ended up telling me this was like a Medici or like a Pope's daughter or something like that. They like to depict themselves as religious icons and such. But I just chose her for just to show the contrast between the two. And if California is the left-hand path, then it would only make sense that Flora, Ida, is the right-hand path. And people who, not to get too political, but I think people can see how California is really in a nosedive direction. Things are just not looking good. People are escaping by the thousands, whereas Florida is nothing but going up in terms of real estate, culture. Everyone's moving here. Patriots are moving here. Freedom-loving people are moving here. I personally like our governor. I think he's a pillar of truth and standing up to a lot of what's going on. We didn't have a a P word here in Florida, the blank demic, with the covey, so to speak.
Right.
Florida was very much spared a lot of the nonsense, and I attribute that to a kind of spiritual. Florida's blessed. I'll just leave it at that.
Well, let's get to what you think about Florida being blessed. You compared it and even said it's the Fertile Crescent. Uh,
Mm.
and making reference to the what we know about the Fertile Crescent is not the true Fertile Crescent. In fact,
Mm.
it's not even fertile at all. You even jumped to the conclusions and said that it also is the Garden of Eden. How did you come up to that conclusion? And can you elaborate on that?
So the Fertile Crescent, Middle East, right? I have always had a hard time buying that. One look at the Middle East kind of, you know, makes people raise an eyebrow. And of course, they tell us that that area was extremely well, um, what's the word, irrigated, that that whole entire North African subcontinent, the entire Arab Peninsula, all of that stuff was so well irrigated that it was almost tropical. And I have a hard time buying that. But to your question, the Gulf of Mexico is the truest, most crescent shaped landmass in the world. From the tip of Florida to the tip of the Yucatan Peninsula, you have the most perfect crescent shaped landmass in the world. Now, if you want to look at it as a crescent moon, New Orleans would be the nose, the perfect face in the middle of the moon, the crescent moon. And this is where you get all this beautiful crescent moon imagery. And here, I'll pull up a picture so you can see what I'm talking about. And Garden of Eden, of course, was right next door, if not inside of the Fertile Crescent. Uh, the mainstream kind of Bible history we're taught is that here we go. That Adam and Eve were expelled from the Garden of Eden and then made their way to kind of what we know as Mesopotamia or Babylon area, Iraq, Iran. Now, in the Gulf of Mexico, it's no coincidence that the star in this crescent is named Cuba. Now, Cuba, coincidentally, is a perfect mixture of the words Kaaba and cube, because after all, the Kaaba is a cube, right? The black cube in Mecca that Arabs do their circles around. They say that is a piece of meteorite and that came down to Earth. Some people say that it landed where it stands today. Some people say it was brought in from elsewhere. But what if I told you that the largest impact, potentially the largest, oldest, most significant impact crater on the planet is actually right there at the tip of the Yucatan Peninsula in the Gulf of Mexico? And this is called the Chicxulub crater. So I'll
Now we're getting into the rabbit hole now, you guys.
Chicxulub crater is potentially what we're told officially what took out the dinosaurs. Now, I'm not a fan of dinosaurs. I'm not necessarily a believer of dinosaurs, not the way that we're taught. Now, I do believe in mammoth and megalodon and saber-toothed tiger and things with fur that we know lived alongside people only a couple thousand years ago. In some cases, potentially only a couple hundred years ago. You still have many prehistoric animals in Florida, in and around the Gulf of Mexico. Now, of course, where are crocodiles and crocodilians most likely to be found? Crocodiles, which are crocodiles and all other animals that are depicted in Egyptian mythology, like ibises, wading birds, crocodiles. All these things are all found in Florida as well, in the Gulf of Mexico. So right there, you have the same isothermal qualities, the climate, you have the same wildlife largely. But can you see? Oh, okay, here, sorry, I wasn't showing you. Let me show you my other screen
All right.
right here. So this is the Chicxulub crater that landed in the Gulf of Mexico at the tip of the Yucatan Peninsula. And we're told by the mainstream, right, that this is the potentially the one that took out the dinosaurs and changed the entire planet. Now, we're also told that Atlantis was struck by a meteor, and the meteor caused a tidal wave that took out Atlantis. Now, the Garden of Eden is actually the same myth as Atlantis, and we're kind of used to the Christian version of the story, which is one Adam, one Eve, one tree, one snake, right? Well, what if I told you that's actually like the kindergarten version of that story? And that story was directly plagiarized from the Greek Garden of Hesperides. And Atlantis is a Greek myth. Is it any coincidence that all along the Gulf of Mexico is what used to be Creek territory with a C? So the Southeast United States was dominated by Creek culture. Creek is Greek, and you can take that to the bank. Kabbalistically, they are the same. A Q is the same as a C is the same as a K, right? Would you agree? We've all seen that utilized in language.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So it's also I brought up the Cuba and the Kaaba connection before. I am of the opinion that whatever is in the Kaaba today was shipped over from the Gulf of Mexico, and whatever they are worshiping as a piece of Islam may originate from the Gulf of Mexico. It would only make sense that that meteor, that is the most worshipped meteor on the planet, could be a piece of the meteor that landed here. And this was the big one. This was the one that changed the course of humans' civilization, not just human life, but the whole planet, right? So this corroborates with the research I've done going and looking at the ancient stone anchors on the west coast of Florida. So you asked about Garden of Eden, and I'm talking about Atlantis. And I hope I showed a little bit about how they're connected. Atlantis is the same myth as the Garden of Eden, and I'll explain here. The story of the Garden of Eden is taken from the Greek myth of the Garden of Hesperides. So here, the Garden of Hesperides is the direct inspiration for the Christian Garden of Eden story. And I know that the Garden of Eden story did not originate with the Christian, but I'm trying to show you that it is not necessarily a Hebrew story either, that the Greeks had this story, and they probably inherited it from the Phoenicians, who is also who the Hebrews inherited it from. And the Phoenicians are kind of our Atlantean grandfathers. They're the descendants of the Atlantis, of the Atlanteans, and we are the descendants. Much of Western civilization is the descendants of those Phoenicians, North African culture. You know, Egypt owes everything it has to the Phoenicians, but they're trying to convince us that it owes everything to the monkeys in Africa, that chimpanzees turned into Egyptians. And that's why they put so much emphasis on the out of Africa theory, evolution. And that's why every museum on the planet has Egypt all over the walls. Egypt this, Egypt that. You go to Mongolia and their museum will have an Egypt section. You go to France, you go to South America, you go to Russia, they'll all have Egypt sections. How many of those countries do you think will have Native American sections, American mound builder sections? Probably none of them, because everything having to do with Atlantis debunks the out of Africa theory. And you know that they like to put everyone in Africa, don't they?
So let me ask you this, as you explain this. So you don't believe that everybody that's Negro stock come from
No, no, no,
Africa.
no.
So you believe that it was already people here.
Yes. So I believe that sub-Saharan Africans are probably like the most Africans that you could say are truly African, but most North Africans have a extreme amount of Atlantean DNA. And I'll tell you how you can see who has Atlantean DNA. Only people with Atlantean DNA can grow beards.
And we saying, and just to confirm, we saying that Atlantean or Atlantis is in the continent that we call America, and more specifically that Fertile Crescent area or the Gulf of Mexico.
Yes. So everyone who has a beard, you cannot grow a beard if you do not have Atlantean DNA. So sub-Saharan Africans cannot grow beards. They will tell you this. You can see it for yourself. You can look it up. You will never see tribesmen out in Africa with big bushy beards. Just like you will never see South Americans, native South Americans with beards or even mustaches. Native Southeast Asians, East Asians, the squinty-eyed Asians do not grow beards. The ones that you see in movies that have these tiny little wisps of beards, that is as much of a beard as you'll see on a 100% Asian person, Asiatic person. So whereas Northern Europeans, Vikings, Irish and Scottish and British, North African, Egyptian, all of the North African and Berber coast, Barbary coast with the Berbers, the Moors, into the Mediterranean Sea, which is where the Atlanteans made many colonies. The Etruscans, Minoans, the Phoenicians were told, the Carthaginians, North Africa, Phoenicians, North Africa, Israelites, Phoenician Israelites in Israel, bearded people. So you don't get beards without Atlantis, without Atlantean DNA. And that's why we had the Barbary Wars. The word barber or barbarian means bearded people. So you can't look for bearded people without Atlantean DNA. Whereas Lemuria, the original Pacific islands, and I'm not saying Moors have to come from Lemuria, but Lemuria was kind of the Pacific equivalent of Atlantis. You have non-bearded phenotypes originating from there, so to speak. I hope that makes it sense. You can follow the beards and
Is it safe to say that these particular people from Atlantis or from that particular region that made their way to North Africa, were they called different names when they got over there? Was they called maybe Moors or Berbers?
Yes. The most, with it's all in the linguistics. The most telling features of Atlantean people was their ability to travel the sea, their beards, so having beards, traveling the sea, and their knowledge of phonetic language. So phonetic language is one letter equals one sound. And you can't trade with other languages, with other peoples, if you're using pictographic language. It might seem like it's easier, right? Like using emojis to communicate, but it's not. The easiest way to teach people languages, which would have been very important to a seafaring people, a maritime people that would have been showing up on different coasts and interacting with people very different than them, with which the Phoenicians did. The Phoenicians colonized before that word meant what it means today. colonized Israel, North Africa. We're told that the Phoenician homeland is Israel. That is not true. The Phoenician homeland is somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean, either the North Pole, and they came down, and this is why the only two people in the ancient world who could traverse the open sea, only two of them, Vikings and Phoenicians. The Greeks, Romans, Egyptians, as great as they were, we kind of know for a fact they were very afraid of the sea, and they could not sail without keeping the coastline in view. So the Phoenicians and the Vikings, however, could get in their boats and sail straight out into open ocean in the middle of the night. So Greeks didn't even like to sail in the dark. They would dock, deploy an anchor, and just sit. They didn't like to sail in the dark. It was terrifying for them. The Phoenicians, it's almost like they could see in the dark. They had a full understanding of the stars. And it's very telling that it's no coincidence that the two most bearded people in the world, the Vikings of Northern Europe and the Berbers and Moors of North Africa, with the Egyptians being included, added to that, people of the North African coast and the Mediterranean are the most bearded people in the world. So I hope that puts some good pieces together.
Nah, it definitely did.
The African Americans need to ask themselves, do they owe all of their beard growing genetics to slave owners? Because if African Americans are sub-Saharan Africans transported to America, it should only be the few who mixed with much European DNA that would have beards. That's the way we're told it. Because you look at a sub-Saharan African, they cannot grow beards. So the beard is the perfect link to show Africans don't owe their beards to white owners in the last couple hundred years. They owe their beard growing genetics. And I'm talking about African Americans, right? What else can we call them? That they owe those beard growing genetics to Atlantis.
And are you? Is it safe to say, just for the layman terms, the brothers that just come in, is it safe to say that the Phoenicians are Atlanteans?
They're about as close as you can get in the historical record to physical Atlanteans, because these are your sea people. In Egyptian history, in early Egyptian history, they were encountering the sea people, and the sea people came from the sea. They didn't know where they came from. They could only guess. And they also say that they were not necessarily the Phoenicians. So Phoenicia and Canaan, we're told, is Israel, right? So why is it that Israelite and Canaanite are used as opposite terms? Like Canaanite is like a slanderous term, right? Well, Canaanite means Phoenician. Another word for Phoenician is Amorite, Amorite, which means Syrian, like from Syria. But Syria is an arbitrarily drawn country today. Syria, what Syria actually means is the land of Sirius, the Eastern Star. So Syria is a land that reveres Sirius. Can you still see my screen? Yeah.
Yeah, we see it. Oh, you talk about Sirius B, the hidden star? Is
Yeah,
the
dog star. Yeah, the dog star. This is the dog star. So Sirius is where you get Syria, because these were star worshippers. The Phoenicians were masters of the stars. Everything the Greeks, Romans, Hebrews learned from the stars, they learned from the Phoenicians. And this is also where you get your Anubis from. Anubis is Sirius, the dog, because Sirius is in the constellation of Cancer. Cancer, right? Cancer is where we get the word canine, canis, canine, cannabis, right? Smoke it. So Snoop Dogg is a genius for coming up with his name because it, he's a dog and it's Snoopy, right? Snoopy's the dog. Well, he's also into the can culture, right? And I'm gonna explain to you how that's all linked. All um, all cartoon dogs. Let's just look at a list of cartoon dogs, right? You're gonna notice something about all their names, and Snoopy is probably the best one. Snoopy. And this might seem kind of silly, but you'll appreciate this. So Snoopy is the dog, right? Well, Snoopy sounds with all the animated dogs, they all have the same name, similar names etymologically, just shifted a little bit. So you have Snoopy, Scooby, Goofy, and of course there's others. I'm just blanking right now, but Scoopy, Snoopy, Pluto, that's the dead giveaway. Pluto, Scooby, Snoopy. Now, why does this matter? Well, all of these dogs take their name from Anubis. So Snoopy is Anubis. Anubis is the dog, the black dog of Sirius, right? In Cancer is the canine, and cannabis, right? This is why the Greeks learned this information from the Dogon tribe of Africa. And this is where we get the word dog. So dog comes from Dogon, and canine comes from Canis, or Cancer, the constellation Cancer, which rules dogs and weed smoking. Scooby, right? Phonetically, they're all the same. Scooby, Snoopy. And this all goes back to Anubis, the black dog. And if you know about rock and roll, the black dog is a central figure. So this is the dog of the underworld. This is Hades, right? Hades is Pluto. Pluto's the same thing. Pluto and Anubis are both gods of the underworld. So it's no coincidence that Pluto and Anubis are the dog. All right, the dog stuff's probably not interesting.
No. That's a dope correlation, especially when you bring up Nubis. And just to usurp it back around to the American, that particular dog style, that hairless dog style, is called a
Ooh, yeah.
Mexican Cholo dog, which is
Cholo.
found right there near Tehuacan. So yeah, man, that's some dope correlation. So, just to get into it, so you don't, so the people that was here occupying the Americas, and dominantly we're focusing in on this Gulf of Mexico area. They was colored people that did not come from Africa. As a matter of fact, they went into Africa at some point in time.
Yeah. The ones with the beards would have been coming from the Atlantic. The ones that can't grow beards would have been coming from the South Pacific. But I can show you some of the first people that Columbus interacted with were almost jet black. So I said that dark black probably comes from Africa, and I'm not contradicting that. I think that most people get into this idea that, you know, someone was here before Columbus, but if someone was here before Columbus, it could only be one group of people. Well, people that think that way are completely taking away the ability to travel from these people. People like you're showing me with turbans are found on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean.
Have you ever seen those images that I just showed you?
Yeah, we actually have an antique store right next door to me that has two of those guys right in the front door.
I believe that these are the Timucua Indians.
Timucua, okay.
The Timucua Indians of Here go another image or rendition of them
Oh
in
yeah, yeah.
Florida. A whole
Yeah,
one.
I have some great Temukua stuff we can talk about. But
Yeah, I love to talk about the Tamuka because it shows correlation between some of the images that you often see in some of the royal households in Europe as well. Uh,
Mhm.
Going back to a particular bloodline that's connected to the Saxons and going back to the Phoenicians, and these Phoenicians go back to the dog. And I'm saying that it comes from what you even alluded that it may come from the North Pole, but maybe not as far north as the North Pole, but maybe from Canaan, and Canada.
Canada,
You see what I'm saying?
Newfoundland.
Yeah, maybe New. Yeah,
Yeah. So I believe that European people do not originate from Europe. They originate from the North Pole. And the North Pole and the Arctic Circle is the only place where features like mine, light blue eyes, pale skin, bleached hair, would naturally come about. Just like you see a husky or a polar bear or an Arctic animal, this is what the original Europeans would have looked like, and they only could have originated in the North Pole. When we hear Caucasian, that's talking about 7,000 years ago, maybe even farther, when Europeans landed on a boat in the Caucasus Mountains and started fresh. Farther south. And that's where you get the introduction of a potentially Caucasian race. There's also allegedly, there's three bloodlines of Caucasians, only three. And I know not all white people look the same, but
are
I'm
we going back to the three particular bloodlines that maybe is mentioned within the Noah, Sham, Ham, and Japhet
it's not
story?
it's a very similar story. It's not the same. I would point out that Shem is almost definitely whoever the Shemites are, or the Semites, the sons of Shem. Mexico on old maps was shown as the land of Shem. Mexico. So Mexico is actually Shem backwards. Meso and Mes and Mex is Shem backwards. And Muskogee, Mississippi, Michigan, all of these words that go from the Gulf of Mexico up to Canada, Canaan, all of these words have Mississippi, Muspa, all these mus and mish and musk words, like the Muskogees, right? Of course. So it shows a singular culture that was the culture between the rivers, right? What does Mesopotamia mean? Mesopotamia means the land between the rivers, and we're told that's Greek, that's almost Aramaic, that's ancient Greek, Mesopotamia. Well, what if I told you that right here in the Gulf of Mexico, we refer to Mexican Americans and Southern Central Americans as Mesoamericans? So there you have your Meso on both sides of the Atlantic. Well, Potamia means river or water in Greek. Potomac, I think you know this. Potama is river and water in Creek, Muskogee, Cherokee, many different languages in the Southeast United States. That is no
Yeah.
coincidence. It is also no coincidence, right? Because remember, um, Washington crossed the Potomac. He crossed the Potomac, and that's a native word. So you have a Potomac River, and then Potoma, like hippopotamus. Hippopotamus means river horse or water horse. Hippo means horse, and potamus means water or river. So it means a river horse, a water horse. So that word is the same in both Creek culture and Greek culture. Now, it's also no coincidence that all over the Southeast United States, in every single state that was previously under Creek territory, Creek with a C, every state previously under Creek territory has a city by the name of Athens. That is no coincidence. Creek equals Greek, and I'm going to be proving this in my upcoming video about the Creeks and ancient Greeks in the Southeast United States, mostly Florida. But yeah.
No, that's a crazy correlation to show the meanings of these particular words and the connotation of the words with Potamia, Potomac, particular large bodies of water. So, I want to ask you another question. This is coming from the chat. I took a series of questions
Mhm.
from brothers and sisters out of the chat, and the ones that was utilized that I seen more, I highlighted and I put those up. And one question is, do most blacks in inner city come from via slave trade?
Oh,
That's
that's the whole question.
yeah, that's the
Um,
whole.
well, I think the answer is found in what we were talking about before. How much beard growing genetics do they have? Because it's very interesting to note that some of the quote unquote descendants of slaves in Haiti, in the Caribbean, for example, they don't grow beards. They don't grow beards the same way that African Americans, quote unquote, especially African Americans in the Southeast United States, can grow beards. Um, we have a lot of Haitians here in Florida, and a lot of the Haitians you'll see very, very smooth faces because those Haitians most likely do fit that mainstream history of Africans being brought over on a ship and being put to work. And, a lot of what you see in the Caribbean does have those truly, truly sub Saharan African genetics, Haiti being the best example. When you get into the Southeast United States, you see men that are, 6 feet tall, 6'4", 6'8", 6 foot, 7 feet. Half the NBA comes from the Southeast United States. Most of the NFL comes from the Southeast United States, mostly from Texas and Florida, the two states with the largest amount of uh, Gulf coastline, of Mexican coastline. So I don't think that's any coincidence. Now Haitians are starkly different from African Americans. Not always, not entirely. And I'm not an insider, so I'm not saying that with inside information, but with my own eyes, the Haitians you find that are just immigrating into the United States, many of them will have the smooth face genetics, whereas African Americans of the Southeast United States almost always have beard growing genetics that are on par with Vikings, these thick, big beards that you just don't see anywhere else in the world. And African Americans, when they go to Africa, you don't look like an African. You look like something else. You have a beard. They're bigger, broader shoulders, bigger structure. Would you agree?
Yeah, I agree. I don't believe that the so-called original peoples, which means first of since the beginning of
Hmm.
time, don't
Yeah.
look like anyone else
Well,
around us.
do you know what Aboriginal means? The word Aboriginal is Abe, so a son of Abraham, and original, in original, son of Abraham, Aboriginal.
I like
It's
that
all in the word.
correlation.
Just like Indian. Indian is almost synonymous with Aryan, because Indian means red skin, right? And red skinned people would either be, um, and also Phoenician meant red, right? So it either meant red beard or red skin. Either way, that could either be um, Northern Europeans who were getting sunburnt on voyages south, sunburnt, or they were covering their pale skin with red ochre paint, as Robert Sepper shows in some of his videos. And this is where you get red ochre burials. And that's why many Native Americans adopted red ochre usage. You also have some tribes out in Africa that use red ochre, but they don't necessarily need it. So they use it to their benefit. But in ancient times, red ochre was used as a sunscreen. You know, dark-skinned people, the darker skinned you are, the less sunscreen you need, right? So you find a lot of these red ochre burials, and you find the Native Americans painting with red ochre a lot of the time. I forgot where I was going with that. But could I show you a picture of the Kali Nago? So the Kali Nago, I was mentioning the people that Columbus first encountered are the Caribs. And Carib is where we get the word Caribbean. Now, for those that don't know like linguistics and phonetics, the L sound, the L and the R are largely interchangeable. They're actually the two most interchangeable letters. So if you've ever heard someone with an Asian accent say fried rice, you'll understand this, right? So the Caribs, Cari is where we get the word Caribbean. I don't think it's any coincidence that Carib and Arab also sound very, very similar. If they had named it the Arabic Sea or the Caribic Sea, I think most people would kind of pick up on this. But they named it the Caribbean, and they spelt it with an I instead of an A and two B's instead of one. And they always do this with native spellings in the Americas. They'll use an extra amount of consonants, and they'll just really fudge up the words, you know, with all these hachis and akis and wakis and wikis. They'll add more letters than actually make sense in order to kind of make the names very unapproachable and foreign and harder to wrap your head around. Whereas when you see more phonetic depictions of words like Kali Nago, where each letter has one sound, that's what you see on the other side of the Atlantic, where each word is very easy to get your head around because each sound is being represented by one letter, and that's phonetic language. That was introduced by the Phoenicians. When you see hieroglyphics, that was Egyptian, and hieroglyphics probably originate in Africa. Phonetic language that was introduced by the Phoenicians, however, does not originate in Africa, not the way we think it does. But why I'm showing you Kali Nagos, these are some of the first people that Columbus encountered. And you can see the depiction right here is more of like the Native Americans were shown today, like the kind of Pocahontas looking people, as I like to call them. Well, when you go, that's a modern depiction. When you go back to an early European depiction of what they looked like, they have close to jet black skin, it looks like. They chose a very dark ink to depict these people. Compared to the bird, you can see the colors of the bird. Do you see what I'm saying? A lot of times they'll be like, oh, that was discolored through age, or that was discolored and that was written by someone who wasn't there. My counter to that would be, look at that tropical bird, and that tropical bird is precisely the colors that its true depiction is. So why would we say the skin color is not being depicted truthfully? So those are Kali Nagos, and I just showed you that Kali, the word Kali, is largely synonymous with dark or black, and Kali is also the same word as Cari, because L's and R's are interchangeable. So Kali, this is the Kali Nago tribe in the Caribbean, and Kali Nago is actually synonymous with Caribbean. Cari, Kali, same word. I hope that makes sense.
No, I do. It makes perfect sense, man. This is a dope bill. I want to just take the time out to shout out everybody in the chat. Make sure y'all hit that like button. I will be dropping the link to the phone lines. As a matter of fact, I'm gonna go ahead and put that on the screen. You can start calling in. We will accept a few questions.
Nice.
If Dr. Longo is up to it.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I have two more questions from the chat from previous bills. So the second to the last question is, let me find it. Okay. Okay. The fifth question is: are you open to any debate in the future, and can you expound on Antonio Flamingo and flat Earth? So I believe those was two
Sure.
questions bundled in one.
Yeah, sure. That's okay. So I just started doing call-ins on my own channel. So here, every once in a while, I don't have a set schedule yet, but if you catch me live on YouTube, I bring people in to call, and we haven't had any debates or arguments yet, but those are welcome too if you'd want to debate a certain point. Sure, we like to keep it to under a couple minutes. You can also reach out to me on Instagram at old_world_Florida if you'd like to talk or want me to clear anything up that isn't necessarily um, pointed out in a video. Also, what was the two questions?
Can you expound on Antonio
Anatoly, yeah,
and flat Earth?
Fomenko.
Yeah.
So yeah, Fomenko was I think most people know who he was, but for those that don't, a Russian mathematician who in the Soviet era set about studying world history and chronology. And he really gave an open mind and looked at history with an open mind and a critical mind, and kind of just threw some water at the mainstream narrative. And it did not hold much water. The mainstream narrative did not hold much water. And he, even in his mainstream, BS Wikipedia page, it'll tell you he's a mathematic genius. But when it comes to his history, he was crazy, right? Don't worry about that, right? So I think that's very telling. He was obviously a smart guy. He knew what he was doing. As an astrologer, I can tell you, I very much appreciate that his approach to dissecting history was he was using, if I'm not mistaken, moon cycles and full moons and eclipse events, and was able to piece together a more, in his opinion, a more believable and concise timeline that largely did away with the Middle Ages. Because as we know, in the Middle Ages, nothing happened in Africa. Next to nothing happened in the Americas. Almost nothing happened in Asia. And you had the plague and a bunch of people eating bread in Europe. And that's all we have in our mainstream history, right? You and I both know that's not true. And that's kind of the questions or the issues he was having when he set out to do this. So he was using astronomical occurrences, eclipses, full moons, in order to piece together a more concrete timeline. Now, do I believe with every single thing? No, that he put together. But I think it's a great place to start. I think, he was a genius. I'm not a mathematical genius. So he put in the work, and it's definitely picking up a lot of attention right now. And I use some of his stuff in my own research and theories, and it pieces together well. But also, he was a Soviet, and kind of his main, what people use against him is that he was a Soviet propagandist, and he just wanted to elevate Russia, and a lot of his stuff does place Russian history above other histories. So you just have to take it with a grain of salt. But as far as flat Earth, I personally am a geocentrist. I am not a heliocentrist. I am a geocentric, stationary, fixed earther. So is it a sheet of paper with a flat sheet and nothing underneath? No, it's not a floating sheet of paper in space. I believe in the earth. I believe in the tree model. The tree model is my model of the universe. As the branches go up, those branches of a tree reach up into the sky and grip onto the sky and hold the air, and they suck in nutrients. And that those branches might extend, let's say, 30 feet up and 30 feet out, the crown of the tree. The roots of that tree, most of the time, in most trees, like a oak, the root system will be comparable to the branch system. So you'll have roots going down, and beneath our feet, you have increasing density. So increasing, increasing, increasing. Above us, you have escaping in density, decreasing density. So the higher you go up, the less dense and less dense and less dense. So I'm a geocentrist. I believe there's infinite earth beneath our feet, just as there's infinite sky above us. We've never questioned that, right? Flat earth, round earth, everyone's on the same page. Oh yeah, the sky goes on forever. All I'm saying is the earth goes on forever. So when some people say a flat earth, some people think of a sheet of paper. And the sheet of paper theory is ridiculous. But geocentrism, and I believe in the Ptolemaic worldview, the Ptolemaic cosmology. Yeah.
So hopefully that answered y'all guys' questions for the chat. This is just a question that I'm gonna end it with before we take on phone calls from the chat. Do you believe that the so-called Black American, with my fingers in quotation marks, do you believe that the so-called Black Americans are in fact the first people or Aboriginal people in the world, and more specifically the Americas?
So, as for the world, I believe personally, and I'm not trying to tell anybody where they come from, but I know what I believe, that on this planet, in paradise times, on this planet, there was once a time when the entire planet was subtropical, abundant sunlight, abundant humidity, warmth, abundant tropical produce, and you could go from Finland to Somalia and see the same climate and the same mangoes, bananas, coconuts on the entire planet. And they'll even tell you this in the Jurassic period. So this is like dinosaur times, right? They try and push it back. They'll say this is 50 million years ago, but they will admit the whole planet was tropical and had mango, banana, coconut, giant fruit, giant mangoes, right? So even science admits that. Now, in that time, before the flood, before the fall of man, before all of what went wrong in history, in paradise times, there was one color, and that one color, in my opinion, was brown. Brown hair, brown-eyed, brown-skinned. So at this time, there would not even be a pure black. In my opinion, the entire planet was populated by a single family. And you could go colored people, yes. Not dark skinned, but brown hair, brown eyed, brown skinned, brown hair. When we were introduced to seasons, when the fall of man occurred and we were cast out of Eden and seasons came, right? God wanted to make a more interesting dish. So he seasoned us and he gave us seasons, and different land masses after the Ice Age received different different climates, different zones, different humidities, different elevations. Whereas before in paradise time, you had a single brown-skinned people. And this is according, if you guys have ever heard of the Bok Saga, the Bok Saga is actually a Finnish story. So Finland is the land with the most blue-eyed, blonde hair, lightest skin, closest to the North Pole. And they tell you this in one of their ancient histories. So that's where I learned about that theory. I've taken it to heart. And it's only after the flood and after perhaps the splitting up of the Tower of Babel that you see different races entering different climatic zones and being subjected to different climates. And this is why, in certain areas, that brown became extremely dark. And in other areas, it became extremely bleached. like European peoples originating in the North Arctic pole, were bleached to the utmost, like a husky. If you've ever seen a husky dog, right? Let's look at a husky. Arctic animals have lighter, blue-eyed husky, right? You get whiter hair, blonder hair. Let's look up a blonde husky or a German shepherd, right? Blonde dogs. You get all this blonde hair coming up. And it's quite obvious this is where Europeans come from. So all I'm saying is that back in this paradise time, you had a more stable, more in the middle brown, closest probably to what you'd see as North African today, if I had to display it, depict it. Whereas since then, it is only our different subjection to different weathers and different climates that have pushed us very far in different directions racially. And so I'm not trying to tell anybody that they're related to someone they don't like, but originally in paradise times, there was one family on this planet, and that's what I believe.
Man, this is a dope conversation, man. Hopefully everybody's enjoying the live stream, man. If you are enjoying the live stream, make sure y'all support the channel by hitting that like button and sharing the live stream on all your social media outlets. The call-in number is open right now. The moderators are putting that in the chat. So as we wait on a few more callers, we're going to take a quick 60-second break. We'll give you guys enough time to go use the bathroom, get something to drink, and we'll be back in 60 seconds. We appreciate you for sticking around, Dr. Longo. Let's get it.
See, my life has been in motion. I'm a little windy. I'm not giving up yet. If you with me, time to place up your bet. Ain't no turning back, got niggas who ran. When we caught his ass, got caught in that jam. Yeah, you know who I am. Yeah, you know who I am. I can feel it coming. I can feel it coming. It's that feeling in your stomach, you can feel it coming. It's that feeling in your stomach, you can feel it coming. Yeah, you can feel it coming. Fake love, that snake you in your face, love. That snake you in your face, love. I told my brothers we gon' make it, that's how God wrote it. And the snake gon' show his face, cause that's how God wrote it. Too much fake love, that snake you in your face, love. Your face, love. That snake you in your face, love. I told my brothers we gon' make it, that's how God wrote it. And the snake gon' show his face, cause that's how God wrote it. Too much fake love, that snake you in your face, love. Your face, love. That snake you in your face, love. I told my brothers we gon' make it, that's how God wrote it. And the snake gon' show his face, cause that's how God wrote it.
Shout out to everybody in the building, man. Shout out to everybody in the building, man. We got a couple callers on the line right now, and the line is going crazy. Oh my goodness, it's going off the hook right now. We got 4 area code, Jersey 777. You got a question for Dr. Longo?
Yeah, he mentioned something about the Tartarian Empire and how the Seminoles were wearing these clothing called pumps. I don't know if he can hear me, AP.
Yeah, he can hear you.
Mm-hmm. I can hear you.
Yeah. How you doing, sir? And, he said that the Seminoles were a part of a big empire across the seas. My question to him is, can he expound on the Tartarian Empire and if they were Negroes or not, those Seminoles, and what else? If there were Negroes that helped build everything around the world from America, because those Seminoles, because I know he just found out that Florida is the cradle of life, the cradle of civilization. But yeah, I want him to touch on that Tartarian Empire with the Tartarian clothing. I want him to touch on that, and I want him to touch on Negroes from building everything around the freaking world. But I'm done, y'all. I thank you, AP. I'm about to be out.
I appreciate that, bro. I appreciate that, man. I appreciate your question. Did you hear his question pretty clear? I'll let you answer it.
Yeah, I heard it. Yeah.
Listen to his answer, brother.
Yeah, thanks for the call. Good question. So what we're looking at right here is called a tartan. And the tartan was, as we're told, most associated with Scottish men and northern Celtic peoples, right? So Scottish men up until, pretty much today wear this type of garb. Now, the Scots, a little bit of hidden Scottish history. Hidden Scottish history is that the Scots descend from the Scythians. And the Scythians are kind of, if the Phoenicians is the navy, the Scythians are the cavalry. So Phoenicians are like the Atlantean navy, and the Scythians are the cavalry on the horses. So the boat people and the horse people. So the horse people you had populating much of the land between India and Ireland and much of in between. And this is where you get your horse riding people. It should be noted that Seminoles and most Creek natives were not horse riding people. So that kind of tells me they descended from the boat people, and they were not as familiar with horse culture like the Asiatic people that invaded America in the last 5,000 to 500 years. And these are your Asiatic bow and arrow people on horseback that are almost identical to Mongolian riders. And these are your Bering Strait natives that would have crossed the Bering Strait, Asiatic bloodlines. Well, the Seminoles and Shemitic people, Shemitic, as I just told you, largely come from Mexico. All right, so why am I showing you this? This is plaid, right? Plaid in Scottish is called a tartan. This is like your family's information. Like this is almost like a code. You could actually read a tartan and learn about the family. And I'm going to show you how Seminoles actually wore this same plaid, and many Seminoles. Well, that's not what we're looking for. That many of these Seminoles actually wore the plaid. Here's a great picture. This does not have the plaid, but you can see, I think this is probably a Billy Bowlegs, but how can anyone deny that this person is related to people across the Atlantic? He has kind of a mix between a fez and a turban with his plumage on top and his vest. Now, vests like that were only commonly being worn across the Atlantic, especially like that. I have pictures of Berbers with almost identical dress. But back to the question. I drifted away from the question a little bit. Sorry.
No,
Okay.
it's all right.
Tartarian, yes, thank you. So the Tartarian, you also have to look at the word Tartarian. In the southeast United States, you also have what were called tar heels. So what's a tar heel? They're black feet, right? Black feet. And we're kind of given this BS history. North Carolina is the tar heel state. Now, those Timucua you showed earlier range from Alabama, right, West Florida, all the way to the Carolinas. And the French and the Spanish bumped into the Timucua when they showed up, and Carolina became French and Florida became Spanish.
So they're talking about Blackfoot Indians or
exactly. Blackfoot,
okay.
Tar heel, Tartarian. And I'm going to show you why. Terry also means earth. Like, so tar means dark. Terry, like terra firma, right? The earth, terra. Terra firma is the earth. Big truck going by. Sorry, but Tartaria could be translated as dark earth or dark feet, black feet stepping on the earth, right? Yeah. So I hope that puts a little bit together, but the Seminoles in Florida we're told officially, are descended from Scottish and Celtic people, in addition to runaway slaves. Runaway slaves is the story that we're given for all of the dark copper black skin found in the Seminole tribe. We're just told it's all runaway slaves, even though Florida was a free state. Florida was a free state until the British came in the late 1700s. But up until then, even the Spanish, who massacred lots and lots of people, right up until the 1820s, African Americans, there was more African Americans, right? You and I both know that's not the right word. There was more African Americans in Florida than white people, way more. But it wasn't just slaves. It was Seminoles and runaway slaves, and they called them cimarrones. Cimarrone is where we get the word Seminole, right? A maroon, a cimarrone, a Moor, a cimarrone. Well, cimarrone, like I told you, the L and the R kind of shift in many languages. So cimarrone became cimalone, L and R. Cimarrone became Seminole. And Seminole, that's what we're told. Obviously, that's not true, because semi is the same prefix as Semitic, and ola or ole is just an American suffix. So same prefix as Semitic or Shemitic, but different suffix. Just like you have Apalachicola, Seminole, it's an American suffix, but it's the same root word. And it's actually Creek is Greek, as I was telling you earlier.
Man, I got another caller that just called in, man. Who is this? 832 area code. State your name and where you calling from. Make sure you make your question.
Capicola Grizzly. Thank you for the time and access to Alabama. Whether you circle back to the Colorado conversation you were having, and would you maybe do some enlightenment about the Taino and the Arawaks? But I'd like to ask you, Dr. Longo, and it's no disrespect because I'm quite sure not a number of people in the chat are by your constant use of the term African American. Could you maybe in the future either reference us as Aborigines or the only American in the definition of Noah Webster's dictionary, if you're not aware of it? In 1828, he very clearly stated the Americans who you've been talking about all night, the copper-colored races of inhabitants of people encountered by people we think to be that look phenotypically like you, Dr. Longo. So it's something just to consider, because it's very irksome and slightly irritating to many of the people that are in this community that you're speaking over. Right? Okay, so just letting you know that in case you weren't aware. Ultimately, what's your actual
I'm gonna have to get my computer charger. I'll be right back.
He's stepping away to grab his charger. While I got you online, hold on just a second, brother. Alabama. Shout out to Alabama. 7 area code.
Yo, what's going on? Peace to Aboriginal Power. Peace, Dr. Longo. What's going on?
Hello?
You still there, caller?
Yeah, hold on just a second. 706 area code. Mute yourself. 832 area code. It's your turn to speak. Go ahead, Alabama.
Wait. Okay,
Yeah,
still same caller, right?
Dr.
Same caller?
Longo?
Yeah, same call.
Right. You're Dr. Narco Longo, right? Is that understood to be correct?
Yeah.
What's your academic background, and why did you pursue this sort of study? Is really what I'm in today.
I'd love to touch on what you said. The first question, I guess. I would refer to you as Aboriginal. I would like to say I don't police my speech for anybody, and I don't get told what to say, who to tell people. And if I'm using wrong terms, it's purely out of ignorance on my end. You can't blame.
I'm trying to help you.
I guess you.
That's why I'm trying to aid you, Dr. Longo, because you're in a community where that term, first of all, has no basis of fact nor proof. It's a political appellation that so-called Reverend Jesse Jackson, when made room announcement, he made it pronounced. So this political
Hold on,
No, I'm just saying
Alabama. I'm
the
gonna let them
political
respond to your
designation.
first question, and I'm gonna let you get it in because I don't want to get too convoluted. Go ahead, brother, Dr. Longo. Stay on the line so you can repeat your second question too, brother.
So, if you haven't noticed, every time, just about every time I use the word African American, I do air quotes, and that's with intent. I know, and I typically pretense just about every time I say African American, as I've said a couple times in this chat to my host AP. You and I both know African American is not the right term. So I don't think I need to preface every time I say it. And when I say African American, I am dissecting the mainstream. And in the mainstream, they use the word African American. So I'm not telling anybody they're African American. But I also think we can't just throw out the mainstream, because if the point of entry for every European person to this type of history is to be told that they have to, fix the words they're using without understanding entirely why, I think it's gonna turn a lot more people off. So I hope I did it in a good enough job pretensing every time I used African American. And the times that I said,
Well, Dr. Longo, I think calling you a doctor, maybe it doesn't offend you, but I'm certain that you went and pursued your academic pursuits to be respected by being referenced as a doctor. Right?
I would like to answer your second question. I'm not a doctor. Not a
and
doctor
that's where
at
I'm
all.
going. And that's where, okay, well, that's what I see on the screen. So that's where I went to inquiring about your academic background. Mm-hmm. And then why did you take it upon yourself to study of people that you continue to seemingly disregard, even in the manner you just answered me? You seem to disregard what I'm trying to help you and explain to you that you would come across better talking to a community that you stop calling them out of the name. And that's the only point of why I'm here. And I'm not trying to be hostile with you. I'm trying to actually aid you in maybe being received better from the community. Because that term is a lie, a fraud, and a political appellation that's being used to keep people like yourself ignorant. Well, I'll wrap up and land my plane on this, AP, because, again, this is the whole problem when people try to study us and tell us who we are and what we are. So I'm trying to understand, where did he get his background for research and his academic study? What guided him to study of people that are ancient? You feel me, my brother? And thanks for the time and the access.
I appreciate the call, and I'm right there with you. I appreciate the help. I'm open to all help, and I want the best terms that I can use. But I don't like the hypersensitivity. I think name calling is kind of, we have to throw that out the window. I've prefaced enough times in this talk African American. I know you guys aren't African Americans. I know that we're on the same page here. But I would also like to say, is someone beeping in? I hear a lot of beeping.
Yeah, it's a lot of calls going crazy in here. We got a 901 area code.
All right, people want to argue, I guess.
Is that a 910 or is that a 706 area code? State your name and where you call.
I would also, before the caller goes, I would also like to say the focus of my research is not any group of people. My focus of my channel is Florida. So old world Florida. It's not old Moorish Florida. It's not Aboriginal Florida. It's old world Florida. So we talk about trees. I talk about fruit. I talk about oranges. I talk about the Fountain of Youth. It's just a small part of my research that includes Moorish history, because Florida, being the starting place of the United States, is undeniably linked with Moorish history. It's even in the mainstream history. So I'm not trying to tell anybody where they come from, and I've said that at least 3 times since I've been on. I just hope people can do away with this sensitivity. I'm not trying to label anyone, and I would think that my simply talking about this stuff is a step in the right direction, albeit with bad titles and stuff like that.
Absolutely. Hey man, it's a gauntlet out here in this dang on chat, man. You know how
I
it
can
go, man.
handle it, man. You throw me in the water. It's okay.
Good. 706 area code. What's your name? Where you, man? We're gonna take a couple more calls before we get out of here. We almost hit the 2-hour marker of this interview. This was a great.
AP?
Yeah, yeah.
AP. Oh, okay. What's up? Peace to the big. Before the break, I heard you speak it being like a single race as far as in the beginning of humanity, and I've been doing some research on that. But as far as the creation of what you want to call the so-called white race of things, I want to ask, like, do you think I guess the term is called lineage or incest, you may say, like, if it was one tribe, and meaning it's the same people, so those type of relationships was happening, like relationships of incest, same, brother and sisters, like intertribal relations. So is albinism being a production of that, and then white people being like a stable genetic like mutation of albinism and becoming their own race? Like, what type of research have you done in those lines as far as finding out like the source of the white gene, and is it because of these intertribal relations and genetic mutations that?
Yeah, so that's a good question.
Hey, brother, I'm gonna let you answer to your question in the chat so you can listen to it clearly as I get a few more callers on the line. I appreciate you for calling in 706 area code.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Okay.
So, thanks for calling. Good question. As a linguist, studying linguistics and phonetics, in the word albino, you have the same word as alpine. Alpine meaning like mountainous, or the Alps of Europe. Albino. So it indicates kind of a mountain origin or a northern origin. Yeah, thanks. That's a good comment. Yeah. But basically, albino, you can see in the word, stems from alpine, like the Alps, right? And as I said earlier, it's an Arctic origin. So albino, I've seen albino people, and now you said a stable genetic mutation. I would agree with that. It's a stable mutation brought about by exposure to Arctic climate over time, not necessarily incest. And when I said family earlier, one family, I wasn't necessarily saying that tight of a family. I think it can be best explained in this. In the Old Testament, you have man, right? The sons of man and man. So man is this pre-flood, pre-paradise humanity. But it's not humanity, it's mankind. And mankind was made in God's image, and there was one type of mankind. Humanity, it's right there in the words for all of us to see. Humanity is mankind in its newest iteration, in its newest manifestation, in the current age after the recent ice age, where we are separated by color and race. Well, let's look at the word human race. Hue, man. That means colored man. And what does the word race mean? Race is the same word as rays, or rays of light. So the hue, man, rays. Different colors of the light spectrum, different rays of light, different rays of color. And it's only after this recent flood that we've been separated by rays and hues, different hues. And that's the human race. Before that, we were just mankind. And it wasn't just a family where a couple sisters, a couple daughters. It was the whole planet except one genotype. This is why dominant genes like Africa, Asia, dark hair, dark skin, they're overwhelmingly dominant, whereas European genes are recessive. So in a single town in Europe, you'll have a more genetic variation than an entire continent sometimes. And that's due to these highly recessive genes that are brought about that and actually can be so I'm not a geneticist, right? I'm not a geneticist, but can be brought about in albinism, and loss of pigment in the eyes and hair is brought about by exposure to Arctic climates. So I hope
Well,
I
hopefully that
hit
answered that.
everything in the question there.
Hopefully that answered that brother question. We're gonna get to one more caller, man. After this one, we got 740 area code, 740 area code. It's your chance to get it in, man. State your name and where you calling from. Hello, 740.
Oh, what's going on with you, brother?
Go ahead.
How are you doing today, brother?
How you doing today, brother? Good to talk to you, Root Words.
No, this rude word. I want to say, man, it's a power bill, man. I love what you and Doctor doing. I'm gonna call him Doctor. I don't care what they say because all people that research, they got doctor skills in them. You know what I'm saying? So, and I think you a doctor too, Aboriginal Power.
Absolutely, appreciate that.
Well, I just want to ask you one question, though. I'll make it simple though. Like when I be over here on your channel, Dr. Longo, thank you for having me as a ranch person. Do you think that I'm gonna ask the same question Aboriginal Power asked? Do you think that there was people that was our complexion over here before slavery?
Yes. Solid yes.
Thank you, sir. And thank you for coming over here, Bill, with my brother, man. I love y'all, Bill, man. Hit the like, subscribe, y'all.
I appreciate you, Root Words. I appreciate you for calling in. I'm going to let my brother Jersey ask the last question before we get into it, man. Well, hold on. This is the last question. 202 area code, calling in. State your name, where you calling from. 202 area code. 20.
What's good, Aboriginal Trap Tabs, calling from DC.
DC. Shout out to DC.
Say it again.
Shout out to the DC area, DMV, man. We love the support from you, the sisters in the area, man. Go ahead, you got the floor, brother.
All right. Appreciate it. Appreciate all the signs for both of you brothers bringing. And I wanted to add, actually, with the Christ state, known as the Buddhist state, known as the Anointed One. My question is, do you believe that entering this state or this mystic belief that people think can happen to people, which is scientifically proven? Do you think that your blood type actually changes in your body? Genetics actually change when you start to unlock these chakras?
Yes. Yeah. So it's no coincidence that Rh negative blood has been associated with like kind of psychic power, and a lot of times you'll hear that Rh negative blood is only found in Europeans. That's not true. It's actually one of the places it's most found is on the north coast of Africa. So that's not a blood type, but it's a rhesus factor. That's like the positive or negative in your blood type. I'm a negative. You might be A positive. The negative, some people, this is what was witches' blood. So in the ancient world, they were burning witches, and it's pretty much known that the witches of the ancient world, black, white, brown, yellow, green, purple, were Rh negative, many of them. And a lot of times you'll see black people that have blue eyes or light eyes almost always have Rh negative blood. I was at Whole Foods, for example, and I met this lady that had jet black skin and bright blue eyes. And I said, you have Rh negative blood, don't you? And she said, how do you know that? And I was like, well, but that's just the negative. So that's the positive and the negative in the blood. There's also what's called like copper blooded and being blue blooded people, right? Having more copper in the blood. versus iron in the blood. And people who have more iron in the blood tend to be right. Blue blood means like rich and noble and royalty and kingly, and right. It means you make more money. It means you have a better job. Blue blooded. Iron blooded, the red blood, is kind of seen as having the more, I don't know, animalistic qualities, more bestial qualities of man, rather than the higher arts. And Atlantis and the Atlantean DNA is believed to be the origin of Rh negative blood. That's why there's little to no Rh negative blood in the Pacific area. But you also have, as far as changing, just, what else can change, going through mysticism and alchemy and stuff like that. There are changes that occur in the body. And one of those changes is the copper in the blood. It's better to have more blue blood. So blue blood is kind of said as like a slanderous thing, like, oh, they're blue bloods, they look down on us. Everyone wants blue blood. Blue blood frequency than copper. Now, if I really want to go out there, this is not it. A lot of people have an issue with this. In the golden age, humanity was at such a high vibratory state, such an electromagnetic mastery of the human system, the chakra, the aura, that their blood may have been gold. And there are many, many accounts in mythology and folklore traditions, religion, that tell of golden blood, silver blood. So it only makes sense that most of humanity today has iron-based blood. However, the royalty, not black, white, doesn't matter. The people that tend to rise to the top of society, that tend to have more of this royal blood, they are attributed to having more copper in their blood. So if you know about the metals of astrology or alchemy, lead is the most base, right? Lead is the worst. Then you have lead, and then you have iron is next base, right? Iron is like dirty and lowly. So most of us have iron blood. If you can drink off of copper and wear as much gold, silver, copper, bling, right? It's not just vanity. There's a reason people wear the bling and the gold, and it enriches the blood. It enriches your cells. It rearranges your cells, because gold is antibacterial, antifungal, same with silver, and same with copper. But once you go lower than copper, stainless steel has some of those qualities too. But iron is not a antiseptic metal. It's not antifungal, antibacterial like copper is. So if you can drink off of copper, do it. If you can eat or drink off of silver, do it. If you can eat or drink off of gold, well, then you've really made it. But do it. And this is why silverware was passed down from family to family, because they were ensuring, you wanted to preserve your genetics. So you had children and you wanted to preserve your genes, but you want to keep that DNA pure. So you give them the silverware, and the silver aids in the restructuring of DNA, and copper too. So wear your bling, drink off of copper, eat with silverware when you can. I use a silver fork, and it will change the chemical composition of your body for the better. So I hope that helps.
Man, shout out to everybody in the building, man. We got one last caller before we get out of here, man. I hope everybody enjoyed the build. Make sure y'all support the channel before y'all get out of here. Support the channel, man. Hit that like button, share the live stream on all your social media outlets. 4 area code, state your name, where you calling from. 412 area code, state your name, where you calling from.
All right. I'm calling from Pittsburgh. All right, so Dr. Longo, I wanted to ask you. Ray from Pittsburgh.
Now you got to turn whatever you're listening to in the background off, and you can just talk to me direct on call. Everything will be all right, brother.
Yeah, I got you. My fault.
It's all good.
Hey, so Dr. Longo, I want to talk about ancient America, because I know you know about the cocaine mummies. So can you expound on how a mummy would get cocaine and found with tobacco traces? Could you expound on that?
Yeah. So
Okay.
there's
Listen
yes.
to
So
the answer
there's
in the chat, brother. You can listen to the answer of this in the chat. I'm gonna let you down so you can answer in the chat. That's a good question, man. And the cocaine mummies, man. You know, which are organic products that are only grown in America, has ever grown only in America. Hey, let's get into it.
Yeah, so that's a great question. Great, thank you, caller. I have talked about the tobacco and cocaine found in the mummies, and they try and say, even though the mainstream still knows this is a mystery, in the news cycle they kind of say this is like contamination that in the late 1800s or early 1900s they were like someone was partying down there in one of these shafts and somehow tobacco smoke and cocaine residue got on one of these mummies. Well, if you just dig a little bit, just dig a little tiny bit into this story, it's evident that is total bullshit. And even the mainstream tells you, well, that's not actually the story. Actually, the tobacco and the cocaine residue was found inside the stomach, so inside organs, in the stomach and the lungs, inside the tissue. So that's
Yeah.
not exposure. That's not contamination. This is ingestion. And then it was mummified after ingestion. But I'll give you a good link here. Tobacco was being grown in the southeast United States when the Europeans showed up by the natives. In fact, many of the tribe names like Tocobago or Tobago have to do with tobacco and Tabasco in Mexico. So this shows you it was this much of the same culture all
Right. Or the Rokende.
Yeah. So you have these tobacco being grown all across the southeast United States, cocaine coming from South America, Central America, and you and I both know people were going across the Atlantic. But for those that might be doubting, well, cocaine and tobacco found inside these mummies. Well, what if I told you that Turkey, one of the first countries in Eurasia to have tobacco and corn, was Turkey? So Turkey had tobacco and corn, and to this day, Turkey has its own like variety of corn, Turkish corn, that's unique to Turkey. And how did that happen? It's probably an American variety that got isolated in Turkey. And Turkey uses the insignia of the crescent and star insignia. And Turkey, what was the national bird of America supposed to be? The turkey. Benjamin Franklin was going to make the turkey the national bird instead of the bald eagle, the turkey. So I'm gonna before I let you go, I know we're gonna wrap up here. Three things that really drill this point home. What's a turkey, and why did it get that name? Because when the Europeans came here, allegedly, they said this thing was like a phoenix, that it was like a peacock but better. And some varieties of turkey are very, very ornate and ornamental. Some of the domestic varieties. So Turkey was named for the Turks, who are Moorish. Not today, the Turks aren't, of course, but they still use that insignia and at one time inhabited North Africa. And then you have pheasant. Now that I've told you that, can you guess where the pheasant comes from? From the fez, because of the red head on the bird, the red tip of the head. This was called a pheasant. Now, is that a coincidence? I think there was people with fezzes running around the United States, and there were. I didn't even show you any pictures of Seminoles, but if you want to see pictures of Seminoles wearing fezzes, wearing turbans, They're all over my channel. You can just search Seminole 1900 or Seminole Chief 1900, and you'll see. Oh yeah. There you go. The plumes, the plumage, the pheasant from Fez. And the last one before I let you talk. The last one of these is Muscovy duck. So the Muscovy duck, they red.
Muscovy duck.
Yeah. Hang on.
Take your time, man. Shout out to everybody in the building, man. Make sure you hit that like, not support the channel. Moderators, drop the link so brothers and sisters can support the channel. This is not an interview. I mean, this is not a build or a debate. This was an interview. So I hope you guys liked it and enjoyed
Sorry to
it.
run away.
Shout out to everybody. Make sure y'all hit that like button. Go ahead. You got it. You got it.
Sorry. So just had to let my friend in here. This is a Muscovy duck. Again, you see with the red face. Now, I'm of the opinion that all of these birds, all of these highly ornate birds were bred intentionally in the Southeast United States at one time. But when the Europeans got here, they gave them all these weird names from around the world, like Muscovy, which means Muscovy. The Muscovites are in Russia. This is where we get the word Moscow. Well, is it any coincidence that you have St. Petersburg, Russia, and St. Petersburg, Florida, on the Gulf Coast? No, it's not any coincidence.
And then just to take it a step farther, when you look at some of the historical structures and some of the geometry that's in it, are in close similarity to what you see in Moscow as well. The dome building.
Yes. So in St. Petersburg, Florida, what I just told you about, or near St. Petersburg, Florida, which is Tampa Bay, you have buildings like this that were sitting here covered in vines in the late 1800s with minarets and domes and spires and crescent moons on the tips of these towers. I'm trying to see if I can get a good picture. But yeah, that's Tampa Bay. And this Tampa Bay hotel, built in 1887, this was the first building in the United States to be complete with electricity, or the first hotel to be complete with electricity. It was wired by Thomas Edison, right? I hope my air quotes, I hope everyone's paying attention to the air quotes. When I air quote, I'm making fun of the mainstream, right? So Tampa Bay Hotel, this sucker was sitting in Florida in the late 1800s before most Americans were even in Florida. Florida was only populated in like the 1920s, really. Up until then, it was like a couple cities and a bunch of woods, swamp natives. But
yeah, I think the true people who occupied this land prior to contact built structures like these, and these were just recoined and refounded and usurped into modern history today, man. I think this was a dope build. I hope everybody enjoyed. Shout out to everybody in the building, man. Shout out to everybody that came through the support. Shout out to everybody that don't necessarily agree. This is what the interviews is for, to be able to get information and hear different perspectives. If there's anything you want to say before we get out of here, Dr. Longo, the floor is yours.
Well, thanks for having me. And, it's not my typical audience. And like I said to that one caller, it's not the focus of my research is anything racial or aboriginal even. The center of my content is Florida. It just so happens that a big chunk of Florida history is pre-Columbian Aboriginal history, and that history is largely erased. So I'm sorry if I used any terms like African or this or that don't apply to people. I hope I prefaced everything enough, but thank you for having me, and thanks for being receptive to the material, and good.
I'm looking forward to the next one. I want to make some correlations around the world. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna stop at Turkey, Egypt,
Sure.
Stop at Mesopotamia.
Yeah.
We're gonna look at the Wu dynasty, and we're gonna make correlations back to the Americas. dealing with astronomy and also architectural structure. I'm looking forward to the next build with you.
Yeah, I didn't show you any anchors. I didn't show you any pictures of Seminoles that I have. I didn't show you any of the flags of the Muscogees and the emblems and such. So we can get into all that stuff.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking for part 2. So be on the lookout. Be looking out for that. We will be doing a part 2 to this. I appreciate you and your time, Dr. Longo. It's the part of the show where we get out of here, man. Shout out to everybody in the building. Make sure y'all drop them fire emojis. Like I said, support the channel if you have not done so. With that being said, be safe, be aware, stay vigilant, stay dangerous. This is your brother Aboriginal Power, and we out.
Whatever it takes. Alleyway.
Coco, this your season right now.
They won't see me. They won't let me I gotta sleep with one eye open, been making me nervous. I take a piss, my hand on the strap. I know the eyes wanna murder. I got a feeling, keep my stomach paranoid. I won't let them, they won't see me, I gotta sleep with one eye open, been making me nervous. I take a piss, my hand on the strap. I know the eyes wanna murder. I got a feeling, keep my stomach paranoid. I can't let them, they won't see me, I put attention, all of my blood, all of my veins. They started with perky, now that hair right up his veins. You started with serving, now them drugs drove you insane. Started with dealing, I grew up with killers, they taught me the game. I got some niggas that die behind, and that shit won't never the same. I know some niggas that lie behind, and that bullet had his name. Ain't no reason to cry about, cause that shit won't never change. MTF the 4th and P, my niggas can't get out the game. I gotta sleep with one eye open, been making me nervous. I take a piss, my hand on the stern. I know the eyes wanna murder. I got a feeling, keep my stomach paranoid. I won't let them, they won't see me. I gotta sleep with one eye open, been making me nervous. I take a piss, my hand on the stern. I know the eyes wanna murder. I got a feeling, keep my stomach paranoid. I can't let them, they won't see me.
Lost, see, I glossed too, we shit ain't been the same. Heard the ops talking to the